The next question is to look at the impact of travel, and I mentioned that the Super 14 competition is unique because of the travel demands. I honestly cannot think of another tournament that asks players to travel as far as the Super 14 did, as regularly as it did as well. So the question is, what's the impact of travel? So let's have a look at this and say that on the left we're going to look at the average score for two teams from the same country playing one another, and on the right we look at two teams from different countries. So when two teams from the same country play one another, the home team wins 54% of the time, the away team 46%. And so we can work out the odds and say that the home team, or any team rather, is 0.85 times as likely to win away as they are at home when they play a team from the same country. So that's a pretty good odd. I mean, it doesn't really change too much from being at home. Compare that to international. Now you get 64% of the time the home team wins the game when an international match is played. So this is, for example, a team from South Africa playing against a team from New Zealand or Australia, and you find that they will win almost 2/3 of the games. And so here, the team is almost half as likely to win away from home as at home when they're playing against a team outside their own country. And that's significant because it does say that when you go overseas, when you travel, your chances of winning are significantly lower than if you are playing inside your own country, even if you're away from home. And then the final stat that I want to add is this 0 out of 34. And that's that since 2000, out of 34 matches, not a single knockout match has been won by a team traveling to another country. And I think these two facts combined, this very high home team win percentage and this factor here, do suggest that travel makes a significant difference. Let's look at the value though. So this is the average score, or the points difference rather, of all 14 teams playing against local teams at home or away. So we'll bring that up and you can see, for example, that the Bulls win by 2 points at home against other South African teams. The Sharks win by 9 points against other South African teams. The Lions have a losing record against these South African sides, and the same thing for the Australians against Australian and the New Zealand teams against their fellow New Zealand teams. If we look at them away, you'll see the flip down. So now all of a sudden, most teams have losing records against other teams from the same country. And what we show here with the black rings is the teams who have winning records at home and away against local opposition. So for example, I've highlighted the Bulls and the Crusaders. You can see there's many others like it. Whereas the red rings gives you an example of teams that have losing records at home. So the Lions, for example, lose by 11 points at home and lose by 24 points away from home against South African teams. Similarly, the Highlanders lose both home and away against other New Zealand teams. And then the arrow here shows the Reds, and they're an example of a team that wins at home and loses away from home. Once again, remember that if we take the difference of this victory margin and this one, we get an idea of the relative home ground advantage, and I'll show you that shortly. This is now the same thing done, but this time we're looking against international teams. So it's a South African side playing against one of the Australia or New Zealand teams, and so forth. And so now you can see that when you play at home against international opposition, very few teams have losing records. Compare that to the graph you just saw, and you'll see that the winning probabilities are much higher when the team you're playing against has to travel from overseas. And the same thing is true when you go away. You can see all the red bars here. These are teams that do not win matches outside of their own country on average. And so here we highlight in red are the teams that have winning records at home against international teams and losing records away when they travel overseas. So I've highlighted a couple of them. And then in black is an example of the Crusaders, who are one of the only two teams that win at home against international teams and have won away, the other team here being the Chiefs. And so once again, now what we want to do is we want to take the difference, home and away, and we want to work out home ground advantage, and that's what you're looking at here. So the top panel shows home ground advantage when a team is playing against local sides, and the bottom is when they're playing sides from overseas. And you'll see that against local teams, there's this anomaly here where the Bulls actually have a negative home ground advantage. I think that's probably an aberration. There were a couple of freakish results in the data set. I think when we expand that data set, that'll disappear. But for the most part, you will see that when teams play at home, home ground advantage is positive. And this is against international teams. And now you'll see that they're all positive except the Chiefs, who it turns out is 0. So the key issue now is the home ground advantage against local teams different from home ground advantage against international teams? And the answer is yes. And so this is the points difference between local and international teams for home ground advantage. So the average home ground advantage, this is from the data that I previously showed you, against local teams is 6.3, and the average home ground advantage against international teams is 10.8. And that leaves 4.5 points, which are the points that I would attribute to quote-unquote geography, in other words, travel. I haven't exactly ascertained the effect of travel because I haven't looked at when the team traveled relative to when it played, but I've certainly, I think, hopefully shown you that being at home against another local side has a far lesser impact than having to travel from one country to the next, and therefore travel makes up a significant component of the home ground advantage. So just in conclusion, again, we have limited data, and that's something that I plan to rectify. I'm going to look at this in a lot more detail in the future, but we've got 61% is the home ground advantage in Super 14, which is among the highest in any competition. The teams least likely to lose at home, Crusaders and Bulls, most likely Cheetahs and Lions. But that's because they're the strongest teams, the Bulls and Crusaders, and the Cheetahs and Lions were the weakest teams. The altitude, and for other reasons that are unknown, is responsible for causing the Cheetahs, Lions, and Brumbies to have the largest relative home advantage, whereas the Stormers and Chiefs had the lowest relative home ground advantage. And then finally, maybe the most important thing, is that 0.85 and 0.56, those are the odds of winning matches away against local or international opposition, and 4.5 points is the size of the home ground advantage that is increased by as a result of having to go overseas to play matches. And so factors related to travel, and that could be time zone changes, could be time away, and things like homesickness account for a large component of home ground advantage. That's basically it from this series. I know that this has been a lengthy 3 videos to go through. Thank you for watching them. Again, any feedback would be most welcome. We will now gear up for the Tour de France, which kicks off this weekend, and we'll bring you our usual analysis, maybe a video post or 2, and you can expect more of these video posts in the future. Thanks again for reading and for watching.